Elena Martinez walked through the crowded marketplace, her simple cotton dress and worn shoes making her blend in with the other working-class women buying vegetables for their families. She had learned to become invisible in this neighborhood, where asking too many questions could get you killed and minding your own business was the only way to survive. The afternoon sun beat down on the narrow streets as she picked through tomatoes at Mrs. Rossi's stand. The elderly woman always gave her the best produce at fair prices, understanding that Elena worked 2 jobs just to afford a small apartment above the bakery. What Mrs. Rossi didn't know was that Elena had once lived in mansions and worn designer clothes that cost more than most people made in a year. 3 years ago, Elena had been someone completely different. She had been the daughter of Judge William Harrison, a man whose decisions from the bench had sent dozens of criminals to prison. She had been a law student at Columbia University, engaged to the son of a prominent senator, with a future mapped out in country clubs and charity galas. But that life had ended the night her father was murdered in their family's driveway. The official report said it was a robbery gone wrong. Elena knew better. Her father had been investigating connections between certain judges and organized crime families. He had shared his concerns with Elena just weeks before his death, warning her that he might have to go into hiding soon. Instead, he had been found with 3 bullets in his chest and his briefcase missing. Elena had fled that same night, taking nothing but the cash she could grab and the clothes on her back. She had spent months moving from city to city, changing her appearance, learning to live without credit cards or anything that could trace back to her real identity. Eventually, she had settled in this neighborhood in Chicago, where people minded their own business and cash transactions were normal. Now she worked at a small accounting firm during the day and cleaned offices at night. Her boss at the accounting firm, Mr. Peterson, thought she was just another immigrant trying to make an honest living. He had no idea that she had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard before starting law school, or that she could probably run his business better than he could. Elena was reaching for a bag of apples when she felt someone grab her wrist roughly. She turned to see Danny Torino, a local thug who had been bothering her for weeks. Danny worked for the Castellano family, one of the smaller crime organizations in the area, and he seemed to think that being connected gave him the right to harass any woman he wanted. "Hey, beautiful," Danny said with a smile that made Elena's skin crawl. "I've been looking for you. You've been avoiding me, and that hurts my feelings." Elena tried to pull her wrist free, but Danny's grip was strong. Around them, other shoppers began to move away, recognizing trouble when they saw it. Mrs. Rossi watched from behind her stand with worried eyes, but said nothing. In this neighborhood, interfering with family business could be deadly. "Please let me go," Elena said quietly. "I need to get home." "Not so fast," Danny replied. "You and I need to talk. I've been asking around about you and nobody seems to know much. That makes me curious. In my line of work, people without histories are usually people with something to hide." Elena's heart began to race. For 3 years, she had successfully avoided attention from anyone connected to organized crime. The last thing she needed was for someone like Danny to start digging into her background. If word got back to the wrong people that Judge Harrison's daughter was alive and living in Chicago, she would be dead within hours. "I don't know what you mean," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just trying to buy groceries." Danny leaned in closer, his breath smelling of cigarettes and cheap wine. "See? That's what I don't believe. A woman who looks like you, talks like you, doesn't just end up in a place like this without a story. And I think your story might be worth something to the right people." Elena's mind raced through her options. She could scream, but that would only draw more attention. She could run, but Danny was stronger and faster. She could try to fight, but that would only make him angrier. Her best option was to stay calm and try to convince him that she wasn't worth his time. "You're wrong," she said. "I'm nobody special. I work 2 jobs just to pay rent. I don't have any money or anything valuable. Maybe not money, Danny said, his grip tightening on her wrist. But information can be valuable too. And I think you know things that people would pay to hear about. Elena winced as Danny's fingers dug into her skin. She was about to try pulling away again when she heard a voice behind them that made Danny freeze instantly. Is there a problem here? Elena turned to see a man in an expensive black suit standing a few feet away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him in a single glance. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he was used to being obeyed without question. Danny's face went pale as he recognized the newcomer. "Mr. Romano," he stammered. "I didn't see you there. No problem at all. Just talking to the lady here." "It looked like more than talking," the man replied. His voice was quiet, but carried an unmistakable threat. "Let her go." Danny released Elena's wrist immediately. "Of course, Mr. Romano. No disrespect intended." Elena rubbed her wrist where Danny's fingers had left red marks. She looked up at her rescuer and felt her breath catch in her throat. She recognized him from newspapers and television reports, though she had never seen him in person. This was Marco Romano, one of the most powerful crime bosses in Chicago. His family controlled most of the city's illegal gambling, drug trafficking, and money laundering operations. Marco stepped closer to Danny, who began backing away nervously. "I don't want to see you bothering women in this neighborhood again," Marco said. "Am I making myself clear?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Romano, crystal clear. It won't happen again." "Good. Now get out of my sight." Danny hurried away without another word, practically running through the crowd to escape Marco's presence. Elena watched him go, feeling both relief and new worry. Being rescued by a mob boss was like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. Marco turned to her with what might have been concern in his dark eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Elena shook her head, still holding her wrist. "Just bruised. Thank you for intervening." "What's your name?" Marco asked. Elena hesitated for a moment. "Elena Martinez," she said, giving him the false name she had been using for 3 years. Marco studied her face carefully, as if he was trying to remember where he had seen her before. "You're not from this neighborhood originally," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've been here for a while now," Elena replied carefully. "That's not what I asked." Marco's tone remained polite, but Elena could sense the steel underneath. "You speak like someone who's educated. Your clothes are cheap, but you wear them like someone who's used to better. And you handle yourself like someone who's been trained to deal with dangerous situations." Elena felt panic rising in her chest. If Marco Romano started investigating her background, it would only be a matter of time before he discovered her real identity. And when he did, she would have to disappear again, leaving behind the small life she had managed to build in Chicago. "I should go," she said, taking a step backward. "Wait," Marco said. "Let me ask you something else. Has anyone else been bothering you like Danny was today?" Elena considered lying, but something in Marco's expression suggested he would know if she wasn't being truthful. "He's approached me a few times over the past month. Nothing as aggressive as today." Marco nodded grimly. "Danny Torino has a habit of harassing women, especially ones who seem vulnerable. The Castellano family thinks they can operate in my territory without consequences, but they're wrong." Elena realized she was standing in the middle of a territorial dispute between crime families. Her presence here had somehow become a factor in whatever conflict existed between the Romans and the Castellanos. "I really should get home," she said again. "Where do you work?" Marco asked. Elena hesitated again, but decided that a partial truth was better than a complete lie. "I do bookkeeping for Peterson Accounting during the day." Marco's eyebrows rose slightly. Peterson's? I know that office. Good, honest business. How long have you been working there? Almost 2 years. And before that? Elena took a deep breath. I moved here from California. My husband died in a car accident and I needed a fresh start. It was a story she had rehearsed many times, and she delivered it convincingly. Marco studied her face for several long moments, and Elena had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing through her deception. I'm sorry for your loss, he said finally. It takes courage to start over in a new place. Thank you, Elena replied. Marco reached into his jacket pocket, and Elena tensed, not knowing what he might pull out. Instead of a weapon, he produced a business card and handed it to her. If anyone bothers you again, call that number, he said. Ask for Tony. Tell him Marco said to take care of whatever problem you're having. Elena looked down at the card. It was plain white with just a phone number printed in black ink. No name or business listed. I appreciate the offer, she said, but I don't want to cause any trouble. The trouble has already started, Marco replied. Danny Torino doesn't give up easily. He'll be back, probably with friends next time. When he does, you'll need protection. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so careful to avoid attention from organized crime figures, and now she was caught in the middle of a conflict between two families. Worse, one of the city's most powerful crime bosses was taking a personal interest in her welfare. Why are you helping me? She asked. Marco was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her face again. Because you remind me of someone, he said finally. Someone who deserved better than what she got. Elena didn't know how to respond to that. She tucked the card into her purse and took another step backward. I should really go home now, she said. Marco nodded. Be careful, Elena Martinez, and remember what I said about calling if you need help. Elena turned and walked away quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel Marco's eyes on her as she left the marketplace, and she had the disturbing feeling that her carefully constructed new life was about to come crashing down around her. The next 3 days passed without incident, and Elena began to hope that maybe Danny Torino had gotten the message and would leave her alone. She went to work at Peterson Accounting as usual, spent her evenings cleaning offices downtown, and tried to pretend that her encounter with Marco Romano had never happened. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. On Thursday afternoon, as she was walking home from work, Elena noticed a black sedan following her at a distance. It stayed behind her for several blocks, making the same turn she made, stopping when she stopped. Her heart began to race as she remembered her father's warnings about being followed. Judge Harrison had taught her to always be aware of her surroundings, to notice when something seemed out of place. Elena ducked into a coffee shop and ordered a small cup, taking a seat near the window where she could watch the street. The black sedan parked across the street, and she could see 2 men inside. They weren't making any effort to hide their surveillance, which worried her even more. Professional killers would have been more careful not to be seen. After 20 minutes, Elena paid for her coffee and left through the shop's back exit, which led into an alley behind the building. She walked quickly through the narrow passage and emerged onto the next street over, then took a circuitous route home that would make it difficult for anyone to follow her. That evening, as she was getting ready for her night job, Elena heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. She lived on the 3rd floor of an old building, and the stairs creaked loudly whenever anyone walked on them. But these footsteps were different, more careful and deliberate than the usual sounds of her neighbors coming and going. Elena crept to her door and looked through the peephole. She could see 2 large men in dark clothing standing in the hallway, speaking to each other in low voices. One of them was pointing at her door. These were definitely not her neighbors. Elena's mind raced through her options. Her apartment had only one exit, and these men were blocking it. There was a fire escape outside her bedroom window, but it was old and rusty, and she wasn't sure it would hold her weight. Her cell phone was in her purse, and she considered calling the police, but she knew that by the time they arrived it might be too late. Then she remembered Marco Romano's business card. She pulled it out of her purse and stared at the phone number. Calling a mob boss for help would mean admitting that she needed protection, which could lead to questions about why she needed it. But if these men were here to hurt her, she might not have any other choice. Elena was reaching for her phone when she heard a voice in the hallway that made her freeze. "Gentlemen, I think you're on the wrong floor." It was Marco Romano. Elena looked through the peephole again and saw him standing at the top of the stairs, flanked by two men in expensive suits. The men outside her door turned around quickly, clearly surprised by his appearance. "Mr. Romano," one of them said nervously, "we didn't expect to see you here." "I'm sure you didn't," Marco replied. His voice was calm, but Elena could hear the danger in it. "What brings you to this building?" "Just visiting a friend," the man lied. "Really? Which friend would that be?" The two men exchanged glances, realizing they had been caught in their deception. "Look, Mr. Romano, we don't want any trouble. We're just doing a job." "For who?" Marco asked. "You know we can't tell you that." Marco stepped closer to the men, and Elena could see the tension in their bodies as they prepared for a fight. "You can, and you will, because this building and everyone in it are under my protection. That means if you want to conduct business here, you need my permission first." Elena watched in fascination as the two dangerous-looking men seemed to shrink in front of Marco's quiet authority. She had read about his reputation in the newspapers, but seeing him in action was something entirely different. He commanded respect without raising his voice or making threats. "We're looking for a woman," one of the men admitted. "Goes by the name Elena Martinez. Our employer thinks she might have information about something that happened a few years ago." Elena's blood ran cold. Someone had connected her false identity to her real past. All her careful planning and preparation had been for nothing. "What kind of information?" Marco asked. "That's between our employer and the woman." Marco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was even quieter than before, which somehow made it more menacing. "Let me explain something to you. Every person in this building is under my protection. That means if anyone wants to speak with them, they speak with me first. And if anyone wants to hurt them, they'll have to go through me." "We're not here to hurt anyone," the man said quickly. "We just want to talk to her." "I'm sure you do. But your conversation will have to wait for another time. I suggest you leave now, before my patience runs out." The two men looked at each other again, clearly weighing their options. They were probably armed. And Elena was sure that Marco and his men were as well. A gunfight in the narrow hallway would be deadly for everyone involved. "This isn't over," one of them said finally. "Yes, it is," Marco replied. "If I see either of you in this neighborhood again, we'll have a different kind of conversation, one that won't end with you walking away." The men turned and walked quickly toward the stairs. Elena heard their footsteps echoing in the stairwell as they descended to the street level. She remained at the peephole, watching as Marco spoke quietly with his associates. A few moments later, there was a soft knock on her door. "Miss Martinez," Marco called. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." Elena hesitated for several seconds before unlocking the door. She opened it slowly, seeing Marco standing alone in the hallway. His two men had apparently gone downstairs to make sure the other visitors had actually left the building. "May I come in?" Marco asked politely. Elena stepped aside to let him enter, then closed and locked the door behind him. Her small apartment suddenly seemed even smaller with Marco Romano filling the space. He looked around the modest living room, taking in the second-hand furniture and the small television that Elena had bought at a thrift store. "You live simply," he observed. It's all I can afford, Elena replied. Marco turned to face her, and Elena could see that he was studying her carefully again. Those men were looking for someone with information about something that happened a few years ago. They seemed to think you might be that person. Elena tried to keep her expression neutral. I don't know what they were talking about. Elena Martinez isn't your real name, Marco said. It wasn't a question. Elena felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. I don't know what you mean. I've been doing some research since our encounter in the marketplace, Marco continued. Elena Martinez supposedly moved here from California after her husband died in a car accident. But there's no record of any Elena Martinez from California whose husband died in a car accident. No death certificate, no obituary, no insurance claims. It's almost as if Elena Martinez didn't exist before she arrived in Chicago 3 years ago. Elena remained silent, not trusting herself to speak without giving something away. On the other hand, Marco said, there was a very interesting case about 3 years ago involving a federal judge who was murdered during what police called a robbery gone wrong. Judge William Harrison was investigating corruption in the court system when someone put 3 bullets in his chest. His daughter disappeared the same night and was never found. Elena's hands were shaking now, but she forced herself to meet Marco's eyes. I don't know anything about that. Judge Harrison's daughter was named Elena. She was 25 years old, a law student at Columbia University, engaged to be married to the son of Senator Richard Blackwood. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, just like you, and according to her university records, she was exceptionally intelligent, particularly with numbers and financial analysis. The kind of skills that would make someone very good at bookkeeping. Elena felt tears building in her eyes, but she blinked them back. You're mistaken. Marco reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was Elena's official law school portrait, the one that had been published in newspapers after her father's death. She looked younger in the picture, her hair was a different color, and she had been wearing expensive clothes, but it was unmistakably her. Your hair was blonde then, Marco said gently. And you've lost weight since this picture was taken. But the bone structure of your face is the same. The shape of your eyes, the way you hold your head when you're thinking. You're Elena Harrison, daughter of Judge William Harrison. Elena sat down heavily on her small couch, finally accepting that her secret was out. How long have you known? I suspected from the moment I saw you in the marketplace. You carried yourself like someone who had been raised with privilege, but you were trying very hard to look ordinary. When I saw how Danny Torino was pressuring you, I realized that someone might be looking for you. Are you going to turn me in? Elena asked quietly. Marco sat down across from her in the apartment's only chair. Turn you into whom? You haven't committed any crimes that I know of. But you know who I am now, and you know that people are looking for me. Yes, I do. Which brings us to the question of what we're going to do about it. Elena looked up at him in surprise. We? You're in danger, Elena. Not just from Danny Torino and his friends, but from whoever sent those men tonight. They know where you live, which means they've probably been watching you for a while. How did they find you? Elena thought about it for a moment. I don't know. I've been so careful. I don't use credit cards. I don't have any social media accounts. I don't contact anyone from my old life. I chose this identity carefully and made sure there was no trail back to my real name. Someone made a connection somehow, Marco said. Maybe through facial recognition software, maybe through someone who remembered seeing your picture in the newspapers. The how doesn't matter right now. What matters is that your cover is blown, and you need protection. Why would you want to protect me? Elena asked. You don't even know me. Marco was quiet for a long moment. Your father was a good man, he said finally. He was one of the few judges in this city who couldn't be bought. He sent a lot of my associates to prison over the years, but he did it fairly according to the law. I respected him for that." Elena felt fresh tears, threatening. He was trying to expose corruption in the court system when they killed him. He had evidence that some judges were taking bribes to reduce sentences for organized crime figures. "I know," Marco said. "And his investigation was getting close to some very powerful people who had a lot to lose if their connections to certain judges became public knowledge." "Do you know who killed him?" Marco hesitated before answering. "I have suspicions, but suspicions aren't proof, and the people involved are very good at covering their tracks." Elena leaned forward on the couch. "Tell me what you suspect." "That's not a conversation for tonight," Marco replied. "Right now, we need to focus on keeping you alive. Those men who were here tonight won't give up just because I scared them away. They'll be back, probably with reinforcements next time." "So what do you suggest I do? I can't keep running forever." Marco stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. "You have two choices," he said. "You can disappear again, create a new identity, and hope they don't find you. Or you can let me protect you while we figure out who's behind this and what they want." "And what would you want in return for your protection?" Marco turned back to face her. "Nothing. Consider it a debt I owe to your father's memory." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "You're offering to protect me from people who want to kill me, and you don't want anything in return? I find that hard to believe." "Believe what you want," Marco said, "but make your decision quickly. Those men might come back tonight, and next time they might not be alone." Elena looked around her small apartment, thinking about the quiet life she had built here. She thought about her job at Peterson Accounting, her few friendly acquaintances in the neighborhood, the sense of security she had finally begun to feel after 3 years of running and hiding. "If I accept your protection, what would that mean exactly?" she asked. "It means you would be under the Romano family's protection. Anyone who wanted to hurt you would have to answer to me. It also means you might learn things about my business that you'd rather not know." Elena considered her options. She could run again, but whoever was looking for her had found her once and could probably find her again. She could go to the police, but they had already failed to protect her father, and she doubted they could do any better for her. Or she could accept help from a man whose business involved violence and crime, but who seemed genuinely interested in her safety. "All right," she said finally. "I accept your protection. But I want to know who killed my father, and I want them brought to justice." Marco nodded. "I'll do what I can to help you find answers. But you need to understand that justice in my world doesn't always involve courtrooms and juries." Elena met his eyes steadily. "After 3 years of running and hiding, I'm not sure I care about courtrooms anymore. I just want the people who destroyed my life to pay for what they did." Marco smiled for the first time since entering her apartment. "In that case, Elena Harrison, I think we're going to work very well together." 2 weeks after accepting Marco Romano's protection, Elena found herself living in a world she had never imagined. Marco had moved her from her small apartment to a secure penthouse downtown, complete with armed guards and surveillance equipment that monitored every entrance to the building. She no longer worked at Peterson Accounting or cleaned offices at night. Instead, she spent her days helping Marco analyze financial records for his legitimate businesses and learning about the complex web of relationships that governed organized crime in Chicago. Elena discovered that Marco was not the stereotypical mob boss she had expected. He was intelligent and well-educated, with a degree in business from Northwestern University. His legitimate enterprises included several restaurants, a construction company, and a chain of dry cleaners that employed hundreds of people and provided genuine services to the community. The illegal aspects of his business were carefully compartmentalized and managed by trusted lieutenants who reported directly to him. More importantly for Elena, Marco was using his extensive network of contacts to investigate her father's murder. He had access to information that the police had never seen, including wiretapped phone conversations and surveillance footage that had been collected by various crime families as insurance against their rivals. On a cold Tuesday morning, Marco came to Elena with a thick folder of documents and a grim expression on his face. "I've found out who ordered your father's death," he said without preamble. Elena looked up from the financial report she had been reviewing. Over the past 2 weeks, she had learned to read Marco's moods, and she could tell that whatever he had discovered was serious. "Who was it?" she asked. Marco sat down across from her at the large dining table that served as her desk. "Do you remember a judge named Margaret Blackwood?" Elena's face went pale. "Senator Blackwood's wife. She's been on the federal bench for 15 years. She presided over several high-profile organized crime cases, including cases involving members of the Torino family, the Castellanos, and several smaller organizations," Marco added. "What you probably don't know is that Judge Blackwood has been taking bribes for the past 8 years. She's reduced sentences, dismissed cases on technicalities, and suppressed evidence in exchange for payments that total more than $3 million. Elena felt sick to her stomach. "My father was investigating judicial corruption. If he had evidence against Judge Blackwood, he did," Marco confirmed. "According to my sources, your father had obtained copies of bank records showing unexplained deposits into offshore accounts controlled by Judge Blackwood. He also had wiretapped conversations between Judge Blackwood and Vincent Torino discussing specific cases and payment amounts." Elena remembered her father working late into the night in the weeks before his death, poring over financial documents and making phone calls to sources who insisted on meeting him in secret locations. She had thought he was just being careful about his investigation. Now she realized he had been gathering evidence against one of the most powerful judicial figures in the state. "Judge Blackwood ordered my father's death to protect herself," Elena said. "Not directly," Marco replied. "She used intermediaries to make the arrangements. Vincent Torino hired the actual killers, but he was acting on Judge Blackwood's behalf. The murder was meant to look like a robbery, and your father's briefcase containing the evidence was stolen." Elena felt rage building inside her chest. "So Judge Blackwood destroyed my entire life to cover up her own crimes." "There's more," Marco said gently. "Do you remember your engagement to David Blackwood, Senator Blackwood's son?" "Of course. We were supposed to be married 6 months after my father died." Elena had loved David once, or at least she had thought she did. He was handsome and charming, and their families had approved of the match. "What does David have to do with this?" Marco pulled a photograph from the folder and placed it on the table. It showed David Blackwood meeting with Vincent Torino outside a restaurant in downtown Chicago. The timestamp indicated the photo had been taken 2 days before Judge Harrison's murder. "David knew about the plan to kill your father," Marco said. "He was present at several meetings where the details were discussed. According to my sources, he was the one who provided information about your father's schedule and security arrangements." Elena stared at the photograph in shock. The man she had been planning to marry, the man she had trusted with her heart, had helped orchestrate her father's murder. "Why?" she whispered. "Money," Marco replied. "David Blackwood has a gambling addiction that's cost him millions of dollars. He owes significant amounts to several bookmakers, including some connected to the Torino family. His cooperation in arranging your father's death was payment for his gambling debts." Elena felt as if the world was spinning around her. Everything she had believed about her life before her father's death had been a lie. The man she was going to marry had betrayed her family for money. The woman who was going to be her mother-in-law had ordered her father's execution. "I need proof," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "If we're going to bring these people to justice, we need evidence that will stand up in court." Marco nodded approvingly. "I thought you might say that." Which brings me to the reason I'm telling you this now. I have an opportunity to get the proof you need, but it's going to be dangerous. Elena looked up at him with interest. What kind of opportunity? Vincent Torino is paranoid about being betrayed by his associates, so he records all his important conversations. Those recordings are kept in a safe in his private office above his restaurant. According to my source inside the Torino organization, the recordings include conversations with Judge Blackwood about your father's murder and with David Blackwood about the logistics of the assassination. Elena's heart began to race. You want to break into Vincent Torino's office and steal the recordings? Not exactly, Marco replied. Vincent Torino is hosting a private poker game this Friday night. High stakes, invitation only, attended by judges, politicians, and business leaders who want to do favors for the Torino family. Judge Blackwood will be there, as will David Blackwood and several other people involved in your father's murder. Elena began to see where this was going. You want me to attend the poker game? With the right preparation, we can get you inside as the guest of one of the regular attendees. While everyone is focused on the game, you can slip away and access Vincent's office. The recordings are kept in a safe, but I have someone who can provide the combination. Elena considered the plan. It was risky, but it offered the chance to obtain evidence that could bring her father's killers to justice. More importantly, it would allow her to confront the people who had destroyed her life. There's something else you should know, Marco continued. Vincent Torino has put a price on your head. He knows that you're alive and under my protection, and he's offering $500,000 to anyone who can deliver you to him. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Why does he want me dead so badly? Because you're the only person alive who might be able to connect him to your father's murder. Your father shared some of his suspicions with you before he died. Vincent can't risk you remembering something that could incriminate him. Elena thought about her conversations with her father in the weeks before his death. He had been careful not to share specific details of his investigation, but he had mentioned his concerns about corruption in the judiciary. At the time, Elena had thought he was just being cautious about his work. Now she realized he had been trying to protect her from exactly the situation she was in now. If I do this, Elena said, if I help you get these recordings, what happens to Judge Blackwood and David and Vincent Torino? Marco was quiet for a moment before answering. That depends on what you want to happen to them. Elena understood what he was really asking. In Marco's world, justice didn't always involve arrests and trials. Sometimes it involved more direct methods of settling scores. I want them to pay for what they did, Elena said, but I want them to face consequences through the legal system. I want their crimes exposed publicly. I want Judge Blackwood removed from the bench and sent to prison. I want Vincent Torino prosecuted for murder, and I want David Blackwood to face the consequences of his betrayal. Marco nodded. That can be arranged. But you need to understand that once we expose these people, you'll never be able to live quietly again. Elena Martinez will cease to exist, and Elena Harrison will have to face the world again. Elena thought about the simple life she had built in Chicago, the anonymity and peace she had found in hiding. Then she thought about her father, who had died trying to expose corruption and protect the integrity of the justice system he had served his entire life. My father didn't die so that I could hide for the rest of my life, Elena said. He died because he believed in justice. If I can honor his memory by bringing his killers to justice, then that's what I have to do. Marco smiled and reached across the table to take her hand. In that case, we have a lot of work to do. The poker game is in 3 days, and we need to prepare you for what you're going to face. Elena squeezed his hand, feeling a mixture of fear and anticipation. For 3 years, she had been running from her past. Now, finally, she was ready to confront it. There's one more thing, Marco said. Once this is over, once your father's killers have been brought to justice, what will you do? You'll be free to go anywhere, live any kind of life you want. Elena considered the question. A few weeks ago, she would have said she wanted to return to law school, finish her degree, and build the life she had planned before her father's death. But her time with Marco had changed her perspective on many things. She had seen how power really worked in the world, how justice sometimes required people to step outside the boundaries of conventional law enforcement. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I guess I'll have to figure that out when the time comes." Marco nodded. "Well, when you do figure it out, remember that you'll always have a place in my organization if you want it. Someone with your skills and your commitment to justice could do a lot of good in my world." Elena looked at Marco Romano, the man who had saved her life and given her the chance to avenge her father's death. A few weeks ago, she would have been horrified by the idea of working for a crime boss. Now she was beginning to understand that the world was more complicated than she had been taught to believe, and that sometimes good people had to make difficult choices to fight against corruption and injustice. "Ask me again after Friday night," Elena said. "After I've had a chance to look Judge Blackwood and David Blackwood in the eye and tell them exactly who I am and what they took from me." Marco's smile was genuinely warm now. "I think your father would be very proud of the woman you've become, Elena Harrison." Elena felt tears in her eyes, but for the first time in 3 years, they were tears of determination rather than grief. She was no longer the frightened girl who had run from her father's funeral. She was a woman who had learned to survive in a dangerous world, and now she was ready to fight for justice in whatever way was necessary. The poker game was 3 days away, and Elena Harrison was finally going home.